Before we start the broadcast, I just wanted to take a moment and thank you for your time and for joining us today. I'd like to take a moment just to really introduce myself and our guest speaker, Nadia Narine. So my name is Sharon Fuchs, and I am the Senior Application Consultant here with Just Food ERP. So I've been with the company now for about a year and a half. Prior to that, I worked in the organic and natural food sector for about 7 years. Prior to that, I spent 12 years working on implementations, consulting, project management, general management, and various other ERP offerings. In that time, I did have the opportunity to work with companies like Kraft and Nestle, so my role here really marries the best of both worlds for me. At the end of Nadia's presentation, I will take you through a traceability exercise with Just Food ERP. The guest speaker is Nadia Narine. We are thrilled to have Nadia as our guest speaker. She really brings to the table 18 years of experience, really focused on quality assurance and technical roles. Not only has she worked within various food manufacturing facilities, which include industries like bakery, confectionery, and dairy, she is currently an approved auditor for GFSI standards like BRC and SQF. She is an approved BRC trainer, provider for food storage and distribution agents and brokers. Nadia's educational background really includes industrial microbiology, marketing, Six Sigma, and ongoing courses for professional development and food safety. Needless to say, you folks are in really good hands. So from this moment on, I'm going to turn it over and make Nadia the presenter. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that intro, and good day to everyone, and welcome to the webinar again. So just to start off, I will not be reading verbatim from the slides, and as you will see, there's not much to them. Most of what I will be saying is speaking to the intent of the webinar slides. I know most of you on the call today already have trace systems in place, so some information may be more of clarification, and for others it may be brand new. So what is food traceability? It is a way of responding to potential risks that can arise in food and feed, and to ensure that all food products are safe to eat. Traceability identifies the path from which a product has originated to the customers to whom it has been supplied to, and consists of interlinking chains of record. So the GFSI, the Global Food Safety Initiative, which benchmarks recognized schemes, including but not limited to, for example, SQF Current Edition 7.2, will encompass some facet of this as part of their traceability system with suppliers. One way of avoiding food fraud is validating your Global Food Safety Initiative certificate that you obtain from suppliers with the BRC or SQF or IFS, FSSC websites directly to avoid fraud. So I will reference food fraud from time to time, and to clarify up front, this is the fraudulent and intentional substitution, dilution, or addition to a product or raw material, or misrepresentation of that product or material for the purpose of financial gain by increasing the apparent value of the product or reducing the cost of its production. This clearly impacts the integrity of trade systems, and many of you may be familiar with recent issues of the scandals with the horse meat as beef in the UK and fraudulent honey in Australia. So although this will not be the focus of the presentation, it is heavily linked to traceability, and I think it's important to be mindful of this as you develop and implement your trade system. Food manufacturers must ensure every part of your receiving, production, processing, and distribution is included as part of the trade system. All lots must be recorded and maintained at each step on all products and containers and bins, and steps including your raw materials, such as your ingredients, packaging, so this would be direct and indirect, intermediate, processing aids, and additives. So what system is best, paper or electronic? As we know, facilities have a responsibility to ensure they are able to trace all raw materials and finished products at any time and at any point in the process. Most regulatory bodies globally require a 4-hour minimum turnaround time for reporting evidence of records for a recall they have initiated. Customer requirements, as many of you may know, are much more stringent and typically are around 2 hours turnaround. Paper or electronic is acceptable. However, it may be onerous on sites with paper involving many individuals' time being taken away from work and most facilities today have opted for electronic systems that provide real-time feedback quickly. It is important that all records, regardless of the form, are maintained and kept accessible for any complaints, withdrawals, and recalls. For paper record storage off-site at storage centers is fine. However, access to documents in storage should be tested to ensure that timeliness would be met if they are needed. Electronic records must be backed up frequently, and consideration to off-site storage in the event of a fire, for example, to ensure the integrity of the information would not be affected, including recording the dates of receiving, the supplier's name, the name of the material, supplier lot or batch code, the amount received, so this would be pallets or cases or even pounds, and expiry date and origin, ensuring that the claims that are common, such as kosher, halal, organic, for example, are maintained, especially for facilities that produce varieties with no claims.
Nadia, sorry, just a sec. Came up, I was just waiting. So the question is really, from your experience as an auditor, what issues have you seen with paper and electronic systems?
Okay. So with paper and electronic, there's different kinds of issues. With paper, most sites that I've seen that rely heavily on paper systems, often records are missing, so there's an opportunity for like improper storage or not actually saving everything. So when we ask for them to receive things, like to go into their record keeping, it's actually not there, or it's not legible, so you can't understand. They're not able to interpret the information from the records. In terms of electronic, not as many issues, but more so with being able to demonstrate that they've actually had the person record the information electronically. So it's more about training and making sure that the individuals have actually inputted the information. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So on the next few slides, we're going to go through what to record. So what I've done is we've just highlighted a few key points in typical processing, in some common processing steps, and I'm just going to highlight what kind of things you should be looking at, or you probably are, just to make sure that they're covered. So information, as we know, from all steps of the process must be included. So raw materials, including primary packaging, so this would be like your bags, your quick locks, etc., and processing aids, so in processing packaging, as well as other relevant materials such as liners, from the supplier right through all stages of the process, right to the customer. So this includes at-time use of the packaging and processing aids as they are used. So receiving. Records of receiving should include, as a minimum, your date, your supplier's name, your product or ingredient names, quantities. This is by pallet or case numbers or weight, as we mentioned before, lot numbers or batch numbers. It's important to understand what these numbers mean and how they are interpreted by obtaining this information from the manufacturer. If materials are received on tankers, it is important that seal numbers are recorded and compared with bill of lading to ensure integrity is maintained. From my experience, some facilities even go as far as keeping the original seals with the bill of lading as part of their record retention. So when we talk about suppliers, we're talking about your brokers and agents as well as your distributors. So that's all steps in your supply chain are effectively captured. A broker or agent is a step where the product is usually never seen and it's strictly transactional. And your distributor would be a step that actually takes physical possession of the goods. An effective system in place for managing also your non-conforming products and materials. So raw materials. So processing documentation should include details of the formula capturing lot or batch numbers, and if raw materials or processing aids are being transferred to alternative means, such as storage bins, etc., consideration should be made to recording lot numbers for the lot number being added to the bin and any lots currently present. So this is for raw material using bins for dispensing or storing minor ingredients, such as salt or sodium propionate or sugar, etc. So ensuring there are periodic clean breaks in order to ensure traceability is clear and manageable. So for example, if you have a sugar bin, recording of lots being added and lots of current sugar in the bin as part of a log perhaps. And then in addition, there should be a means for a clean break. So in other words, running the contents of the bin out to the lowest point and any remaining sugar amount recorded, including any possible loss that may be in the bin at that time. The reduction in accurate traceability is compounded by the potential for product to be trapped in dead zones during filling and emptying. So the bin is then emptied and cleaned to start a new week. So for example, if a particular delivery is identified as being contaminated, this would require disposal of an entire product in the storage tank and possibly several lots of finished product, as the company would not be able to identify the specific batch of finished product which contained the contaminated material. For bulk materials such as flours, oils, and yeast, there must also be effective trace systems in place, accounting for overages and underages, as well as considering clean breaks. So the site must think of the impact of adding fresh raw material to bins and silos that already contain product. So for these types of bulk materials, there must be clearly documented at time of use for the lots being used in that product, and there must be a process in place for managing part-use materials and WIP and rework, which we're going to discuss shortly as well.
Okay, I've got a quick question for you. We've had somebody ask if you can differentiate manufacturer versus distributor for some of these tracking items like ingredients.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So manufacturers are actually the facilities that are making the ingredients. So if we're talking about an ingredient supplier, they're actually the ones who are actually doing the manufacturing, the processing aspect. The distributor would be solely just storing the product and then sending it back out. So they're not actually taking part in any of the steps of the manufacturing. They're just strictly doing that distribution function. So you may have a warehouse where your ingredient supplier is making the product and then shipping it to you for distribution, and then it's coming to you. So all of those steps should be factored as part of your traceability. Hopefully that answers it.
It does. And then the next one, actually, since we're on a roll, you mentioned a fresh break. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Okay. So with bins and with silos, the challenge around that is that there's always overlapping lots. So facilities have to consider when they're going to have a fresh or clean break, meaning when are they going to actually, empty out everything in their bin or their silo and then start fresh, where there's like a brand new lot going to be started over again. So for different types of raw materials, it's obviously going to be different in terms of timing. So when you have a flour silo, you're not going to be doing that as frequently, but that's something that the facilities have to do in terms of risk. So how much risk are they willing or can they actually take in terms of still being in control of that raw material if there was an issue? So clean break just refers to having your silo or your bin completely emptied so that you're starting a brand new lot in that bin, and you actually know exactly what the starting point is again.
Thank you.
So another step could be your processing details. So processing details would be if the site is using subcontractor processes, so where a processing step is being performed by another manufacturer and then brought back to the site for further processing, and trace systems must be in place. So for example, if you have a chocolate manufacturer, company A, outsourcing the cocoa bean roasting step to company B, the roaster, the beans are brought in, cleaned at company A, and then sent to the company B for roasting, and then brought back in for further processing at company A, where the product is being packed. So this is an example of subcontracting processes, and this also has to be traced. Processing aids, such as release agents on breadlines, amounts, lots, and the finished product associated would also need to be included as part of your processing details. Packaging. So with packaging, materials must be recorded at time of use. So you would also be reducing the amount of product affected in the event of a withdrawal or recall. This is also an industry best practice. So most facilities are recording lot numbers at the time of reception, but at time of use is actually becoming much more common in industry. So any waste raw materials, processing aids, or even finished products must be tracked and recorded and accounted for. Waste should be factored in for finished products so that all material is accountable for. And this is going to take us into waste. So any waste from your processing should be weighed and measured and logged in order to ensure the raw material or product is accounted for. So waste due to materials that were, for example, out of spec, damage, etc., that were entered as part of inventory upon receipt, they must be tracked as part of the trace system. In addition, any finished products being disposed after being packaged, perhaps due to underweight or some sort of out-of-spec parameter, they should also be logged and tracked as part of waste.
There was a question from Sam. Many distributors also manufacture, like they cut steaks, etc. Are they not responsible for the raw materials all the way through to the finished goods?
In terms of the role of a manufacturer could be directly distributing raw materials to a customer, definitely. So they could be holding both of those functions. When we talk about distribution solely as a supply chain function, that's strictly what they're doing. They're only taking in product and setting it back out in that same packaging material, if you will. If a manufacturer is doing multi-functions, then absolutely. I mean, if they're manufacturing the product and then distributing it to your facility, for example, directly, then they're taking on that distribution function, and then, of course, they would have to be responsible for ensuring all trace activities for distribution are included as well.
Thank you.
Next, we have a work in progress, WIP, and rework. So WIP or work in progress is material that is being worked back into the same lot. So there's no loss of traceability. Rework is where material of one lot is being used in another lot. So it's crucial that these mixed lots are recorded and tracked in case of an issue. So an example of WIP in a bakery would be where there is dough that needs to be reprocessed, for example, at the retarder or proofer due to a quality issue, and it's remixed at the mixer within the same lot. An example of rework would be if the dough at the retarder or proofer is stored in a bin and labeled with that current production date and placed in a cooler. The next day, a portion of this lot is placed in the next day current lot production. So how long is long enough in terms of keeping our records? So no matter how records are kept, whether it's paper or electronic, facilities must ensure they're able to access it when it's needed. So typically, keeping records for the shelf life plus 2 years is an industry that's practiced. However, it's important to factor in legal requirements for the country the product is being made in, as well as it's being sold to, as this differs globally. So traceability is compulsory for all food and feed companies, and all feed and food operators have to have trace systems in place, and they must be able to identify where their products have come from and where they are going to, and rapidly provide that information to authorities when it's requested. So information should be retained in a manner that is easily accessible when needed. So next we're going to talk about testing your trace system. So as mentioned, testing should be done at a minimum of annually to meet regulatory and customer requirements, and this would be including your primary packaging, raw materials, and finished product. So essentially you would be doing 3 different types of trace tests annually. Raw materials, including your bulk, identity preserved items, should also be incorporated, as this is more difficult to trace and to ensure fraud is being managed. And the key to determining appropriate frequency for a company should be the method that the trace is being done. So if you're using paper, you would expect an increased frequency due to more opportunity for error, and also consideration to the number of processes and whether you're targeting a particular process on a regular basis, or if you're testing a whole, you would probably do it less frequently. So in terms of bulk raw materials, we would be looking at testing your trace systems for flour, yeast, oil, sugar, for example. When we talk about identity preserved materials, it would be something like if you were making, for example, Belgian chocolate, ensuring that there's effective trace systems in place to ensure that the chocolate that you're really receiving is from Belgium, because that's a claim. So sites should ensure raw material suppliers are challenged to ensure that they have effective systems in place to ensure they are able to trace and account for any raw materials supplied in the event of a withdrawal or recall. So mass balances, when the trace challenge is done for a raw material, we're looking at a particular lot received, so the quantity, and where did it all go. So this is referred to as a mass balance. The expectation is that not 100% would be retrievable. However, there should be 100% accountability. So in production loss, waste, anything like that. So the site should be able to account for 100% of everything, though. Traceability of your finished product. The traceability systems of finished products should be done for a certain product made, the quantity produced, tracking where it was distributed to, and accounting for 100% of all the product made. So testing should include contacting your customers that the product was shipped to ensure that current and correct contact information is on file. So I would not encourage you to call all of your customers and start the call by telling them you're doing a mock recall and would they be the right person, because of course all they would hear is recall and then you would have bigger issues. So a more wise method would be to call them and to engage in a conversation that if there was some type of issue, if this is the correct number, the correct person to call at any time in the day. And then you could also follow up with an email to demonstrate and to confirm as evidence as part of your trace activity that this part was done. The best way to test your trace system is to select a product that has already been shipped to a customer. So this means to physically select a product. So this has much greater impact on the team doing the trace, and it makes it much more real. So as an auditor, and some of you on the call have had me as an auditor, you would know that when I do trace exercises during an audit, prior to the audit, I'll ask the site if they sell into retail, and if they do, to give me a list and what retail stores they sell to. And I will actually involve my family, and we'll go out and we'll purchase a product, because I typically audit within bakery and confectionery and dried ingredients, so it makes it a little bit fun. And I'll buy a product, I'll bring it to the facility, and I'll actually ask them to do a full trace on that product as well as a vertical exercise, so all the information related to that product to be able to demonstrate to me that it's safe. And it actually puts some real realism to it that, this is actually food that we're making for consumers. So it's really nice to actually use something physical that your team can see and work with. So once a trace has been done on the lot, again, the expectation is 100% recovery. This would include your holds, your sales samples, staff sales, etc. Then a raw material from that same finished lot can be selected for your mass balance. And traceability should be done in both directions, and all the supporting documentation that you obtain during your trace should be kept as well to support it. And then lastly, packaging. So the same approach of the mass balance can be used for packaging, where a material is selected from a finished lot and a trace for how much of that packaging lot was received and where did it all go.
We do have a question. Sorry, I'll just interject.
No problem.
One is from Peter. Why is indirect packaging traced? Isn't it only necessary to trace primary packaging?
The reason that facilities historically have traced primary packaging is because it's in direct contact with the product. So if there was an issue in terms of a food safety risk, it would be related to direct packaging. The reason that it's encouraged to trace all packaging is that an issue can happen with anything. So even though it's indirect packaging, you may still have an issue with it, and you would still be responsible for being able to trace it. So the risk may not be as high, and you may not want to do it as frequently, but you definitely should still have effective trace systems in place for all aspects of your packaging.
Okay. Nicole would like to know about R&D and how it fits into R&D paperwork and how it fits into traceability overall. How long should records be maintained within R&D?
A lot of that depends on customer as well. And if it doesn't depend on customer, like if you're actually doing the R&D and you're selling, I guess, your formula as is to customers, I would follow the same guidelines as mentioned in the presentation. So typically shelf life plus 2 years as a minimum, and then if not, for wherever you're making the product, the country that it's being made in and where it's being shipped to, you should look at the regulatory requirements and make sure that you're meeting those. It may be more stringent than that, but typically shelf life plus 2 years is the norm. I would say even for R&D records as well.
Okay. And one more from Steve. Clean breaks is the title. What if it's not possible? For example, if molasses is stored in a tank having many millions of gallons and it's never emptied.
Right. And I mean, and that's the challenge with silos and with bins, right?
Mm-hmm.
So running it down to the lowest possible point then, and then just making a note, making a record of what are the possible lots that could be in there. I mean, the challenge with silos and bins is that you're always going to have some type of overlap, and the main concern and challenge is trying to minimize that amount of overlap in the event that there's an issue. So definitely with like molasses, I mean, you wouldn't even want to introduce water in there in terms of cleaning. With that type of process, the only thing I've seen in industry practice is running it down as low as possible, and just tracking and recording what possible loss are there before you start building up again.
Thank you. We have many more, but let's keep going through this, and we'll start to we'll pack some more in at the end. Great.
All right, sounds good. So in terms of risk assessment, as many of you on the call know, a whole webinar could be done on risk assessment and management. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to touch very briefly on it and just highlight some key points that I think are important in terms of risk assessment, just keeping in mind that you could go much more in depth than I'm touching on it. So risk assessment is a key step in designing your trade system to ensure relevant variables such as the nature of the product and raw materials are adequately considered. So the design of an effective trade system depends on the nature of your raw materials, your batch lot sizes and uniformity, your transportation methods that are used throughout your supply chain, what production processes are used, how the final product is being supplied, and the number of links in your supply chain. So essentially, this is your hazard analysis that you're doing as part of HACCP, which is based on Codex. You're applying the likelihood of your hazards you've identified and the severity if that hazard would actually occur. So this is regardless of a prerequisite being in place, and looking at what those risks are. Risk management, it has to do with how the site chooses to mitigate those hazards identified as part of the process. So typically there's 4 outcomes. So you could be reviewing and revising and continuing to monitor your current systems and procedures. You could provide additional information to your consumer, perhaps on how to use the product in a more effective way, possibly going into a withdrawal or even as going far as instigating a recall. So as we all know, regulatory matters, of course, so it's important to understand a number of issues within regulations and how these have an influence on your company's actions. So the responsibility to notify competent authorities in the event of a product recall or withdrawal rests with the brand owner. So with the own label retailer, when an own label product is recalled or withdrawn from the market, and with the manufacturer or the agent where the product recall or withdrawal relates to a branded product. So for example, if there's any of you on the call that are making products for Walmart or Costco or Loblaws, then their private label products would typically a recall withdrawal would be initiated with those retailers. And if you're making any products under your own brand, of course the recall withdrawal would be initiated through yourself. So where a company considers or has reason to believe that a food it has imported, processed, manufactured, or even distributed is unsafe or unfit and left its control, the food should be withdrawn or recalled from the market and competent authorities informed. So there is an obligation on all businesses that are involved in your supply chain who do not have a direct influence on the packaging or labeling, safety or integrity of the product. So for example, your retailers or distributors to cooperate with the company responsible for withdrawing or recalling a product and authorities. So this means that as part of your trace exercise, it's really important that everyone in your supply chain understands their legal obligation to support you in the event that you have a withdrawal or recall, because they do have a legal responsibility once it's been initiated. In the event that a company is aware of a product that has been placed on the market and it is unsafe or unfit, it has a legal obligation to immediately inform authorities. So one of the most common nonconformances I guess I see related to this topic is that most facilities are doing mock recalls or trace exercises, but it's the learnings and the findings that it's important to integrate back into your food safety management system after you've done your root cause analysis. And this just ensures that traceability systems are being robust at all times. So a lot of facilities aren't doing this or struggle with doing this. So it's really important to consider this as part of your completing your trace exercise. So a management review should take place to analyze where the system worked well and where it failed. Results of your trace test shall be brought to the attention of personnel responsible for any of the activities which underperform, and not just to their superiors, as issues are often related to the rule and not to people. Corrective actions and timescales for implementation should be agreed on, and steps should be taken to ensure that corrective actions are followed up on and confirmation given when they are adequately completed. The requirement for a traceability test is to challenge and to validate the operation of your system. The test should show that the system works effectively and efficiently, and that staff are adequately trained in its operation, and that corrective actions are identified and taken to correct errors and to continually improve your system. So these two terms, withdrawals and recalls, are often confused and used interchangeably in industry, but they do differ considerably. Withdrawal is being able to effectively contain product that has been sent to a customer and not yet reached the consumer. A recall is being able to recover all product that has entered the mainstream market and is with consumers. So a recall is defined as the process by which a product is removed from the market, where the product has reached consumers and they are advised to return or destroy products supplied to them. Withdrawals can be for food safety or quality reasons and do not have a legal setting. So recalls involve government and have a legal aspect as consumers are now directly impacted. It is therefore defined as the process by which a product is removed from the market up to including the retail stage and including actions by your producers, the manufacturers, packers, distributors, wholesalers, and even your retailers, but where consumers are not asked to return or destroy products. So for example, if a product is shipped to a retailer and not placed on their shelves for sale and returned, for example, because of damaged cases. So this could be an example of a withdrawal where it actually has not reached a consumer yet. And it can be because of a quality or a food safety issue. If there was a product that was placed on store shelves, for example, cans, and there were bloated cans, for example, and it was deemed that that was related to a food safety issue, that could lead into a recall if consumers were actually purchasing those off of the shelf when it was noted. So it's important to remember that trace systems need not be complicated, and that the best trace systems in any company is one that fits into your normal working practices of the company and enables relevant information to be collected and accessed quickly and easily. So how do you know if you're actually in a recall state? So I find that a lot of facilities are challenged with this because, they get complaints in, and how do you make that decision? So there are 4 steps within risk assessment process in the event of a potential recall, and there is a really great resource out there written by the BRC Guidance for Recalls. Even if you're not working towards BRC certification, I would encourage you, if you can get your hands on it, to utilize it because it's an excellent resource. So basically what I'm going to take you through is the guidance for BRC. So the guidance starts with hazard identification. So when your company becomes aware of an issue or an incident, it's extremely important to gather as much information as possible in order to understand fully the hazard, the nature of the complaint or the issue, and its significance. So when undertaking such a process, there are a number of points that you have to consider when you're doing your screening. So this process would be carried out by a person who has the right and appropriate knowledge of the company's products and their hazards. Ideally, the person would have been involved in the development or maintenance of your food safety program, so probably your QA or food safety professional at your site, or even a HACCP team member. You would probably be looking at to look at this step. The next one would be hazard characterization. So when your company has established or recognized that it has an issue to address, you should immediately attempt to identify the nature of the possible effect on consumer safety. So in many cases, this can be easy. So for example, if there was glass contamination where the glass concern is large and sharp. However, there may be some cases where the effects of the contaminant is not clear or unknown, and you may need to seek expert advice from outside organizations such as consultants or research or labs, trade associations, or even government. The next step would be your exposure assessment, which is once it's established that there is the presence of a hazard and that there is a risk of possible harm or injury to the consumer, is to make an accurate assessment of the exposure to the consumer. So this is where your expertise and knowledge carrying out the risk assessment comes to play, and the speed of collecting and reviewing records and documentation is key, and it's important to ensure that all key information and all staff that needs this information has access to it when it is needed. And then lastly, risk characterization. So comparison of the exposure assessment against data sources. So this would be the final step within the risk assessment process where information on the hazard characterization and exposure assessment are brought together. So basically you're looking at the hazard that you found in your product and looking at data known in your industry to see if any types of other incidences like this have occurred and how they've been dealt with. And then to conclude, there are 3 important principles relating to effective communication for incident management if you have a recall. So it must be defined. It obviously has to be very accurate, and the communication process must be fast and effective. So I don't know if Sharon mentioned when she did my intro, but I did work with Maple Leaf Foods Canada Bread for about 13 years, and I was there when they had their recall. And I can tell you that the communication that came from Michael McCain within the organization and externally was seamless. So it is really, really important that you have that part down pat in the event that something like that were to occur, because when it does occur, you don't have the time to have that all that information being developed. And that actually brings me to the end of my presentation. I would like to acknowledge sources that I have used for developing the presentation. So BRC, SQF, references from UK regulations, Fsma, the Safe Foods Act, and GS1. And I thank you for your time and for listening. And I hope this presentation will benefit you and your facility's implementation of trace systems.
Great, thank you. So what we'll do now is we'll just go through a traceability exercise. I'll take back the control, and then what we'll do is we'll open up the floor. We still have about 4 or 5 questions that are still outstanding to come back to. So I promise folks, we call this the 60-second recall. It takes me about 20 seconds if I just button my lip, but it'll take me about 2 minutes to explain. So what you should be seeing is the role center for the quality audit processor within Just Food ERP. So what I'm going to do, I won't explain everything except it looks and feels just like a Microsoft homepage. I'm just going to go into a traceability exercise. So I'm selecting item trace, and if I set the stage, maybe my vendor has phoned me and he said, you know what, Sharon, I've got a problem with this lot number, and he shares the lot number with me. And I'm sure you'll all agree, as I knock on wood, I can track it usage to origin, but let's go origin to usage because it hopefully will not happen in our facility, right? And I hope everybody's nodding their heads. From there, I'm just going to select trace. So out of the gate, a couple of things have happened. I can verify that that lot number did come in. It's associated to an item. I've associated to the PO receipt header. I can click in on that purchase receipt header, and now I can dive into the actual posted purchase receipt associated with this receipt of these goods. So I'm on the phone with Kevin Fenner. I can confirm that this was the date the stuff came in, and it was cashew oil, and I received 5,100 pounds. I am off and running at this moment in time. I say thank you, Kevin, and I hang up the phone. A couple things. On my trace screen, I can see that there's that 5,100 pounds that came in. I've got 4,000 remaining. So what I would typically do is put these on a quality hold journal. And when it goes on a quality hold journal, it means it cannot be picked, packed, moved, consumed, or anything until it's released or disposed of. But let's find out where that 1,100 pounds went. So as I start to scroll through, I can see that 1,100 pounds got consumed in a production order. And that from there, then, that 1,100 pounds actually went into a WIP item of 116,000 pounds. So I spread that all over the place. And I can start to dive through, and as I scroll down, that 116,000 pounds, we turn that into 145 pallets of product, to which now I've got 96 pallets remaining. Again, same as the 4,000 pounds, I would put that on a quality hold journal. And again, it can't be picked, packed, moved, consumed, taken, or anything. So it's sort of frozen in time. From here, like I said, folks, 60 seconds. Here are all the shipments then associated to that delta of pallets that we're missing, about those 50 pallets that are out of stock, so 7, 5, and so on. So because we are a Microsoft offering, we are completely integrated to the Office suite. I can output this report into a nicer format, and it will actually just send it out into Microsoft Excel. So not that format that you see. Great. So hopefully you guys can all see that Microsoft Excel sheet. And from here, what you're going to see is that 5,100 pounds that came in. There's that 116,000 pounds of WIP. There's the 145 pallets. And as I scroll through, here are the shipments that we sent it to. So you've got Walgreens, you've got General Candy, Greater Austin Merchants, and so on and so forth. So that's sort of step number one, where we have the ability to take all of the data that we're we're tracking the lot numbers from the raw materials as they come through. We track them through manufacturing, output into finished goods, and now ultimately who we sell them to. That's format number one. And then the second one is, you need the ability to communicate to your customers potentially what's gone on. So we create what we call recall segments, and it's essentially a giant mail merge. So what might that look like? Well, here's all the customers, and it's just going to output that document into Word. Open this up. And then from here then, it's pre-formatted text. This can be your logo, and it says, "Dear Mr. Minger, really sorry. Recently we sent you this product. We sent you 7 pallets on this lot number, on this date, with this sales shipment. Please do the following with it and let us know. Sincerely, house account." So I did say 60-second recall. It takes me about 2 minutes to share that with you, and if I had just sort of bit my lip, it would have been about 20 seconds of non-stop action. So from here then, if I could bring Nadia back in and we can go through some more questions that we've got.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. So we've got a few from, let's start with Nicole. Nicole has asked, do you have recommendations on how to account for in-process waste? Would this be in production areas, or would you recommend having a garbage log with the waste handler?
That's a great question. It really depends on your process. What I've seen a lot of facilities do is both. Like if you have waste that's strictly just food waste, for example, then that being weighed out in your waste containers outside, for example. There's some other facilities that actually vacuum their in-process waste up, so they have a separate vacuum system and they weigh out bags every shift. The more you track, I guess, is the easier it'll be for you to narrow down. So, for example, if you left it to waste being tracked by the day with your waste collector for fee, then obviously you'd have a number of different lots that are in there. So there's a couple of different ways of doing it, and I'd say both is probably the best in terms of if you did have an issue of being able to trace it down.
Okay. Thank you. Mark has asked, how does all of this affect produce in bags and boxes used for distribution split or less than full cases items? Many distributors bag them. I think we were talking about packaging there.
It's related to packaging material?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so for fruits and vegetables, and if I'm understanding the question correctly, we're talking about like the trays that the fruits and vegetables would be put on, like in the retail stores?
It sounds like that. So it looks like.
Yeah. So the same approach would be used. So as you're using the trays or the film to wrap the vegetables or produce, it should be tracked at time of use. It should be checked even while, like during production for a lot, just to make sure there's no changes and that the integrity, like that everything is fine. So it would be tracked exactly the same way for the trays and for the film, or even for the clamshells. You would be tracking it the same way.
From Sam, what will the HARPC's effect on all of this?
It'll obviously have a huge effect on it. I mean, most facilities that have had their HACCP systems in place for a long time, a lot of them have already considered HARPC. So you'll definitely have, I mean, where HARPC plays a really big role is where I mentioned about food fraud. So it's looking at the risks and the hazards that are associated and making sure that you factor those in and consider it. So I would say definitely would have a huge impact. But I do know a lot of facilities, even prior to HARPC, have already factored in those types of risks with their regular HACCP program.
And then we have from Kristen, if we use paper records, how important is legibility when doing an audit? If we can read something and the auditor cannot, will we get deducted points?
Well, that's kind of subjective, but I would say no, because the main thing is that the site has to be able to demonstrate compliance. So if you're doing a trace exercise and it's recorded by paper, most of what I've seen is that the site isn't even able to interpret it. So, I mean, if you're able to read it and I'm the auditor and I can't read it, I would just ask, like, can you read what this says? And if you can, I mean, that wouldn't really, like, there's no such thing as a nonconformance for not being able to read something. However, what I would say is that all records that you are using, they are legal documents. So if you had to, you know, knock on wood, use any of these records in court, you would have to be able to demonstrate that they were in place and that they were effective, and they would have to be legible. So if you look at it from that aspect, I guess it would be really important for whoever is recording to make sure that they're recording legibly. But from an audit perspective, it would not be appropriate to raise a nonconformance for not being able to read a document.
Great. I've got 1 more minute. Let's try and get one more question here from Anita. Is there a best practice to lot track packaging film that is on a roll? There's no one-to-one package ratio like a bag. So can you track by roll, i.e. 12 rolls received, 12 rolls used?
That's a good question. So what I've seen a lot of facilities do is when they bring a roll to the line, they'll of course record the lot when the roll is added, but they'll also do periodic checks for the UPC on the roll as it's running, because those rolls can last for a really long time. So like they may do it every 15 minutes, every half an hour. I mean, you would have to determine what the risk is and what's appropriate in terms of your facility. But doing checks at the beginning of when you add the roll, during the run of the product, as well as tracking any garbage waste from that roll would be important as well. So from a industry best practice, before you add the roll, during production, after production, is an industry norm now in terms of recording and verifying lot numbers. Okay.
And one more question, I'll slide it in under the gun. So Kristen's asked, where would you record the usage of packaging supplies? So from maybe associated with the recipe or as you manufacture the goods. You recording X number of bags or X number of packages or boxes at the time of output. So when you, at the end of a production order, when you're recording the usage of packaging supplies, right, you've used X number of bags or cases or boxes associated with this output run, you would then record it when you finish the production order and you're recording consumption of raw material into output of finished goods?
Yeah, I would say that's probably the most appropriate time to do it. I mean, really, it has to fit into your food safety management system. From my perspective, I guess from an auditor, it doesn't really matter. As long as you're recording it and you're able to demonstrate that you have control and you're able to trace it effectively, that's all that really matters. From an operational perspective, that's probably the best place and where I've seen it being done.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time, and thank you so much, Nadia, for your time and your knowledge, for sharing that with us. That was wonderful.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a wonderful day. Happy short week, everyone. Take care.